the story of the first peoples of the Americas, a tale of incredible courage and endurance. Long before any maps were drawn, long before the rise of ancient Rome or Greece, a great human journey was already underway. These were not aimless wanderers. They were families, hunters, and explorers, driven by the primal needs of survival and the endless curiosity that lives within us all. Their descendants would eventually populate 2 entire continents, creating thousands of unique cultures and nations. This epic migration did not happen overnight. It was a slow, deliberate process that unfolded over many thousands of years. The world was a very different place then, gripped by the bitter cold of the last great ice age. Vast sheets of ice, miles thick in some places, covered much of the northern hemisphere. This ice locked up enormous amounts of the world's water, causing sea levels to drop dramatically. This drop in sea level revealed something extraordinary. It unveiled a bridge of land, a connection that had been hidden beneath the waves. This was the key to a new world. This land bridge, which scientists now call Beringia, connected what is now modern-day Siberia in Asia with Alaska in North America. It was not a narrow, icy path, but a vast, open plain stretching for nearly 1,000 miles. It was a complete ecosystem, teeming with hardy grasses, shrubs, and the animals that fed on them. For the people living in Asia, this was not a barrier, but an invitation. Following the herds of game they depended on for their survival, they stepped out onto this new land, unknowingly beginning one of the greatest chapters in the human story. The journey was not a single event, but a series of waves of migration. As groups of people crossed Beringia, they slowly began to move southwards. Some may have traveled down a corridor that opened up between the massive ice sheets covering North America. Others, perhaps, followed the coastline, using simple boats to hop from one pocket of land to another. Each path presented its own unique set of challenges and opportunities. Over many generations, these pioneering people spread out, adapting and thriving in every corner of these new lands, from the frozen Arctic to the tip of South America. Imagine a world ruled by giants. This was the world the first Americans entered, a place we call the Pleistocene epoch. They were not alone in this vast, cold landscape. They shared it with magnificent creatures known as megafauna. Enormous woolly mammoths with their long, curved tusks roamed the plains in great herds. There were giant ground sloths as tall as a modern giraffe and saber-toothed cats with fearsome dagger-like teeth. Bison, much larger than their modern relatives, grazed on the tough grasses. For these early people, these animals were everything. They were a source of food, clothing, and shelter. To survive in this challenging environment, these Paleo-Indians had to be incredibly skilled and resourceful hunters. Hunting a mammoth was not a simple task. It was a dangerous and complex operation that required immense courage, cooperation, and planning. A whole group of hunters would have to work together as a team. They would track the animal, perhaps for days, learning its habits and looking for a moment of weakness. Then, using their collective strength, they would try to isolate a single animal from the herd, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. The key to their success was their technology. These early people were master craftsmen, particularly when it came to making tools from stone. They would carefully select the right kind of rock, like flint or chert, which could be shaped to have a razor-sharp edge. Through a process called flint knapping, they would strike the stone with precision, chipping away flakes to create sophisticated spear points. These points, often called Clovis points after a site where they were first found, were ingeniously designed. They were sharp, durable, and could be securely attached to a wooden spear shaft. Every part of a successful hunt was used. Nothing was wasted. The meat from a single mammoth could feed a family group for weeks. The thick hide was carefully scraped and tanned to be made into warm clothing, blankets, and coverings for their simple shelters. The massive bones and tusks were not discarded either. They were carved into more tools, needles for sewing, and perhaps even ornaments or ceremonial objects. This deep respect for the animals they hunted was a central part of their worldview, a connection to the natural world that ensured their survival. The only constant in the universe is change. And about 12,000 years ago, a great change began to sweep across the planet. The Ice Age, which had held the world in its grip for so long, started to lose its power. The climate slowly began to warm up. The enormous glaciers and ice sheets that had covered continents began to melt. This meltwater flowed into the oceans, and as a result, sea levels around the world started to rise. The land bridge of Beringia, the very path that had allowed humans to enter this new world, was slowly submerged beneath the waves, disappearing once more. This warming climate had a profound effect on the world's ecosystems. The vast, cold plains that had supported the megafauna began to transform. As temperatures rose, forests of spruce, pine, and eventually oak trees began to spread across the land. The grasslands changed, and the types of plants that the giant animals relied on for food became less common. This environmental shift, combined with the pressure from highly effective human hunters, was too much for many of the megafauna. The woolly mammoths, the giant sloths, and the saber-toothed cats slowly began to disappear from the landscape forever. The extinction of the megafauna meant that the people had to adapt, or they too would disappear. They could no longer rely on hunting a single large animal to feed their community for weeks. Their entire way of life had to change. This challenge sparked a new wave of innovation and creativity. People began to hunt smaller game that thrived in the new forests, such as deer, elk, and rabbits. They became expert fishers, learning the rhythms of the rivers and coasts. They also became master foragers, gathering a wide variety of nuts, berries, roots, and seeds. This shift in diet also led to the development of new and more specialized tools. The large, heavy spear points used for hunting mammoths were replaced by smaller, more refined points suitable for smaller, faster animals. People invented new tools like the atlatl, a spear thrower that allowed them to hurl their weapons with greater force and accuracy. They developed grinding stones, or metates, to process nuts and seeds into flour. They wove nets for fishing and baskets for collecting plants. This period of adaptation shows the remarkable flexibility and intelligence of these early peoples. As people adapted to their new environments, their societies also became more complex. No longer constantly on the move, following massive herds, many groups began to establish more permanent settlements. They built homes from local materials like wood, earth, and stone, creating villages in places with reliable sources of food and water. This stability allowed for larger communities to grow, and with them, new ways of living together. People began to form intricate social networks, with families and clans forming the basis of society. They were laying the foundations for the great civilizations to come. With settled life came the opportunity for new ideas and goods to travel great distances. Extensive trade networks began to develop across the continents. People in the Great Lakes region might trade copper with groups living hundreds of miles away in the Ohio Valley. Shells from the Gulf of Mexico could be found in communities far to the north, and obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for making sharp tools, was traded across vast territories. This trade was not just about exchanging goods, it was also about exchanging knowledge, stories, and traditions, weaving a rich cultural tapestry across the land. Life was not just about survival, it was also about celebration and giving thanks. Many cultures developed deep spiritual connections to the land and the cycle of the seasons. The harvest was a particularly important time of year. After months of tending to crops like maize, beans, and squash, the entire community would come together to gather the food that would sustain them through the winter. These harvest festivals were joyous occasions, filled with feasting, music, dancing, and ceremonies to give thanks to the earth for its bounty.